Welcome to a roundtable discussion for Introduction to American Politics course. Today we're going to talk with leaders of the North Shore Community Development Coalition and the Point Neighborhood Association about the voter registration service learning project that our class is participating in. I'm Professor Jackman in the Political Science Department, and today we have with us leaders of the North Shore Community Development Coalition and the Point Neighborhood Association. First, I'd like to introduce Lucy Corchado, who is on the board of directors for the North Shore Community Development Coalition. She's also a leader within the Point Neighborhood Association and is on the staff here at Salem State University. Welcome.
Thank you.
Next is Kristen Anderson, who is the Community Development Director for the North Shore Community Development Association. And over here is Joy Winkler, who is the Community Engagement Coordinator for the North Shore Community Development Coalition. So welcome and thank you very much, and thank you for working with the class on this project. First, what I'd like to do is just have you all tell us a little bit about these two organizations and their history and their mission.
So I guess I'll start with the North Shore Community Development Coalition. What we are is a CDC, a Community Development Corporation, and what that means, especially around here, is that we're a nonprofit organization that is focused on affordable housing and community improvement. And the mission of our organization is to provide quality, affordable housing and foster community development and economic empowerment on the North Shore. And so we do that in a number of ways. One is that we focus on building affordable housing in the region, and we take on projects that have a neighborhood revitalization component to it, meaning that not only are we building homes, but we're trying to have the greatest impact for communities that we can. So primarily working in neighborhoods that maybe are neglected or disinvested in or disenfranchised, so that not only are we providing affordable housing, but we're bringing in investment. We're working with community members, local organizations, and local government to bring in investment to help improve the quality of life for everyone in the neighborhood. And beyond that, our community development work ranges from a number of things. We have community engagement, which is essentially community organizing. So I'll let Joy talk a little more about her role in a bit. But we also have a youth jobs program that we work with youth and teens from the neighborhood to improve their community and the quality of their neighborhood. We have a community English program that is focused on providing English language skills to new immigrants in the neighborhood. And we also have a resident services position that is meant to work with our low-income tenants to make sure that they're getting access to all the resources that they need to be economically self-sufficient. So our overall goal is to help improve the quality of life in these neighborhoods through investment, through housing, and through the sort of community supports that they need. And the North Shore CDC, we've been around for about a year, but we were formed out of two founding organizations. The two founding organizations were in Beverly, where we do all this work as well, and in Salem, which has a long, rich history of community development. And I'll let Lucy talk a little bit more about that. But the organization, even though it's been around for the last year and a half, has about 30 to 40 years of experience working in Salem. So.
Oh, sure. Well, should I talk about the CDC or?
Why don't we finish on the CDC and then we'll shift over.
Well, I got involved with, at the time, it was the Salem Harbor Community Development Corporation, and got involved with them when there was a kind of a campaign to obtain some buildings from what was known as a slumlord in the neighborhood, and the goal was to purchase these buildings and properties from this gentleman and rehab it and maintain it into affordable housing. And so basically that was my kind of introduction to the organization, which also had support from other nonprofits like ECHO and some churches that were involved as well. So I think at the time I was probably 16, 17, so I joined the board as a youth representative along with my sister, and the campaign was successful, and they've, I think history goes on from there. They remained in the neighborhood. They're one of the largest property owners in the Point neighborhood, and we've remained, have a collaborative relationship with them.
Great. Did you want to add a little bit about the community outreach and organization?
Sure. My title is Community Engagement Coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying community organizer.
Mm-hmm.
So my main purpose is to go out and listen to the needs of the community and then empower community members to seek change in their neighborhood. So we do that through housing, and we do it through neighborhood revitalization efforts. But my job is basically to be on the ground talking to people and engaging them in the process.
Can you tell us a little more about the Point Neighborhood Association?
Sure.
And
So
its
the
role?
Point Neighborhood Association basically started back in about, I want to say 2001, after the elections. In the midst of problems that were found with folks going out to vote at the polls. There was a lack of information in Spanish. There were people that were turned away at the polls. Requiring identification before they voted, and so there was a lot of kind of disenchantment with the whole voting process, and there wasn't really anyone there to kind of organize any type of response back or request for this information. And so there was an organization, Neighbor to Neighbor, political grassroots organization that kind of guided a number of volunteers who were active in the neighborhood and formed this neighborhood group, which I was fortunate enough to have been elected president at the time, but also under the guidance of the North Shore, which at the time I keep referring to the Salem Harbor CDC because that's the name before they merged. But with the CDC and Neighbor to Neighbor, we were able to form this Point Neighborhood Association, just to kind of get our name out there, the needs known to our city officials, and just getting a seat at the table is basically what we were looking to do.
So issues around voting and voter participation were at the core of your organization's founding,
That was
it sounds
the
like.
kind of the onset of the organization, and then branching out to any other quality of life issues in the neighborhood.
And the Point Neighborhood Association, is still one of the more active neighborhood associations in Salem. And very often, the city will go to you guys, or outside businesses will call you guys up to make sure that they're doing the outreach that they need to be doing. With
We've been very fortunate, that's correct, in that the city does, inform us. There's definitely more of an open communication between projects and issues that are happening, so that, again, we do have a seat at the table, and I think they recognize the need to do that outreach.
Now, can you all talk about more how voter registration in particular fits in with the community development and housing, affordable housing mission? How do you see those two as connecting?
Well, voter registration is directly tied to neighborhood development. In doing some research, we found that communities that vote are better represented in government. They receive more attention as a result. They get greater social capital. There's less crime. There's more connectiveness. There's better health and better services in general. Additionally, people in communities that vote have greater access during and after the election than communities that don't. Obviously, if you're a city councilor and you know that this community is going to vote, you're going to be more inclined to listen to their needs and their requests than the constituents that don't vote. Because if you're only helping those that don't vote, you're not going to be reelected, most likely. So, there's definitely that back and forth between the elected officials and the constituents that are there and showing up at the polls.
And I think very often we like to sort of stop and ask the question of, picture in your mind a neighborhood in which there is a high voter turnout, in which people are very active in their local government and local communities, and then picture what a neighborhood looks like where nobody is participating in that. And I think we have some preconceived notions about that, whether right or wrong, but at the same time, I think there is something to be said about getting your local politicians or higher up too to pay attention and to listen and to hear your voice. And voter registration is one entryway into being able to participate in a forum for that response.
And I think it would help to give a little history of the neighborhood itself, in that the makeup of the neighborhood is predominantly Latino, mainly from the Dominican Republic. You have a case where there are, you know, maybe a low percentage of actual registered voters because of their status. And historically, unfortunately, there was always that kind of mindset of, well, it's not worth going to campaign in this neighborhood because there's not enough. First of all, they're not going out to vote, and there's a high immigrant population there who aren't registered voters. So there was always that kind of preconceived notion that it just was a waste of time and to vote. Up until I think the organization was formed, the Point Neighborhood Association, and they rallied enough and organized enough to actually elect one of their own. So I think that's when they started recognizing, well, there is something to be able to campaign in that neighborhood and the need to.
And just to point out too that this is, we're focusing on Salem, we're focusing on this neighborhood in particular, but this is an issue common throughout the nation. I was just reading a statistic about how where a middle income neighborhood would have on average 86% voter participation in the presidential election, low income communities typically have about 50% voter participation. So low-income communities are already struggling against these barriers to participate and get involved, and so this is kind of how it's being played out on the ground, even in our own community, when it's an issue that's nationwide.
Well, can you all talk a little bit more about sort of obstacles to both voter registration and voter participation?
Well, I'd say that especially in the Point neighborhood in Salem, citizenship is an issue. It is a predominantly immigrant community. That doesn't mean that there aren't citizens there, and a lot of them are not registered to vote. And a lot of that has to do with access to information, language barriers. Lucy mentioned a little bit of candidates not going out and talking to these potential voters. And then another issue that's come up recently is the access to a polling location. There used to be a polling location located at the Salem Housing Authority, which was within walking distance of the Point neighborhood, and they closed down that polling location. And so now there's only a polling location that's out by the Willows, which is pretty far.
A mile and a half.
Yeah, it's far for anyone that has any sort of mobility issues, and it's just not convenient. So that's one of the things that we're hoping to kind of address with our voter registration drive is trying to get people to take on voting as something that they are committed to doing, so that they can get back that polling location and really petition the city to.
So it's
to get
still
involved.
out of the Willows.
It's still out.
Yes. Yes. And we've seen a steady decline in number of voters actually going out from the neighborhood since the consolidation of the polling area.
When was it moved?
I want to say 2009.
Huh. Because you had mentioned in our earlier conversation about the high voter participation in the 2008 election.
Yes, during the presidential elections.
That could be impacted by the moving.
It was a pleasant surprise to read that actually the percentage of voters in the Point neighborhood in 1-2, which is Ward 1, Precinct 2, which included the Point neighborhood, was actually higher than the percentage of the city on average. So, it spoke to, I think the motivation that there was at the time. Obviously, it was a presidential election, so you tend to get more people, but that they do in fact exist in the neighborhood.
That shows the importance of the work that we're about to embark upon. Is there anything else you want to say about voter participation in general, and levels of voter participation nationally at all, or?
Well, nationally, the statistics show basically kind of what you would expect. Communities that are ethnically diverse tend to have lower voter participation. Communities that are low income tend to have lower voter participation. Communities that have mobility issues tend to have lower voter participation. And we see all of those happening in the Point right now, since it's incredibly ethnically diverse. Low income, I believe many of the people are at or below 50% of the area median income. And then mobility issues. We also have an aging population in the Point.
And I think it's important to point out too that, you know, it takes a lot of commitment and energy to decide to vote to begin with, whether or not you are living in a low-income community or are low income or are new to this country. I think it still takes an active commitment, and a lot of that is feeling that there's a reason to do it, feeling like it actually applies to your life, and that you're being represented. I think there's the information component to it, understanding what you're voting for, and I think, you know, that's across the board. I think everyone who's probably watching this right now is probably thinking to themselves, oh, I don't even know if I'm registered to vote. You know, that's going to happen. But when you look at a community and you realize that there are these additional barriers and there's these additional challenges, there's a need to advocate greater, you know, more greatly for those sort of strategies to help reduce those barriers.
I'd like to add also, with regards to barriers, at the time, again, we were formed under the direction and guidance of both Neighbor to Neighbor and the CDC. And Neighbor to Neighbor has since left, and so that also affected kind of that information and outreach that was done so well in the past was now gone. The CDC was going over through a turnover as well, and a merger, and so there wasn't that emphasis on voter registration back then as well. So that kind of also, I think, aided in the decline.
Well, can you tell us more about it's clear the voter registration drive is important to the community, how it's going to work and what the drive will look like?
Sure. So right now we have 2 dates that are set up, April 14th and April 21st. And they're scheduled from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. I believe that your class has the option of coming to one or the other, and they should have let you know which one.
And some or few are coming to both. So
great,
yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen at 11 o'clock on both of those Saturdays is we're going to have a 1-hour orientation. It just goes over the basics of how to do a voter registration drive, what our expectations are, you know, what to do when you encounter, you know, whatever the response is, and we'll make sure that you're ready to go out. We will provide lunch, which is exciting. Who doesn't love lunch? And we're also going to match you with a volunteer from the Point Neighborhood Association or someone that's volunteered with the North Shore CDC before who is bilingual. We've talked about how much of the community is Latino, and therefore they speak Spanish, and so we want to make sure that everyone is able to communicate in both Spanish and English. So we're going to have that match there as well.
And I want to point out too that one of our goals in getting this going again too is just to start that re-engagement in this process. You know, I think we have to be a little realistic in what we're going to be able to accomplish on 2 afternoons. But our hope is that this is going to help re-engage some of the residents in the community and also build some awareness for the students in this class as far as what we can be doing and what we have the capacity and the potential to do. So, you know, we'll talk more about that on the day of. And the other sort of element I want to add is I think that as we're doing the orientation, we'll talk a little bit more about what is the drive that's going to not only get people to register to vote, but feel like there's a reason to go and turn out to vote. And right now it sounds like what we'll be focusing on is this polling location topic, and, you know, how can we sort of help inform the community on that this is an issue and this might be something worth looking into further.
As well as what's happening, I think, nationwide with the economy and the need for advocacy in these social services that a lot of the folks depend on in the neighborhood. And, you know, so what do? Do you wait till they're in real jeopardy of, you know, losing funding, or do you, you know, stand up and fight and give testimony that these are needed?
Right.
So, and the way of doing that is voting.
Right.
We always try to tell folks your voice is your vote. So.
Right. And as Kristen mentioned, there may be some students that aren't registered to vote yet, and voter registration forms will be there. This can be an opportunity for you to register to vote as well. Well, is there anything else anybody would like to add to the conversation here?
I'd just like to say thank you for helping. You know, this is a really exciting project to be doing. You know, we always talk about wanting to build partnerships and wanting to bring the university and the CDC CDC and the community together, and I think
Mhm.
this is really setting a nice precedent. And so the fact that everyone will be volunteering on these days,
Mhm.
you know, this is a project that I know is good for class, but it's also having a real impact on
Yes,
our organizations. So.
I'm very excited. We've talked at a couple of our meetings as well, and in fact, some of the candidates for Senate have expressed real interest and would like to send some of their volunteers. I said, that's fine. We're not actually, campaigning for any particular candidate, but the need to get the vote out is very important, and they obviously realize that as well.
Yeah, and I want to stress that it's a nonpartisan voter
Yes.
registration drive. Hopefully we'll have, I'm not promising this, but more likely than not, T-shirts that, say register to vote and the names of the organizations, but no one should wear or will be wearing anything related to a candidate. It's entirely nonpartisan voter registration drive.
And I just want to add that voter registration drives are really important and have, in some cases, increased voter turnout by 14% in some communities.
That's a great point.
It really does help to have that follow through and the outreach and the invitation, and it will make a difference.
Great. Well, thank you all, and thank you for providing this opportunity to our students. I think it's really going to enhance everyone's understanding of what voter participation and really looks like, and strategies to increase participation in American politics. So thank you very much, and thank you to the students for participating in this course and participating in the voter registration drive. We all look forward to meeting everybody in person on April 14th or on April 21st, or to seeing you both days. Thanks very much for tuning in, and we'll see you in April.
Thank you.
Thank you.